Brian, did you really choose to make a bass guitar from Majora's Mask and not actually make the bass guitar from Majora's Mask? I mean, it was right there. Also, yours looks a little flat and unfinished. And do you know what I have to say to those two things? Yeah, no, you're right, my bad. Let's make Japas Crab Bass, and this time, let's finish it. Except this time we're starting from a little further back because as you can see, I tried to find a 3D model of the crab bass and I was unable to do so, even when I searched specifically for Majora's Mask, which means we're gonna have to sculpt it all from scratch. And of course I started in Nomad Sculpt because while I am still learning it, I do have the most experience with this program, and I was able to come up with something that I think looks pretty good. I tried to go for a nice blend between the concept art and the actual in-game model, again, to kind of get that cartoony feel while also being somewhat realistic. And I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with how this part turned out. So I brought that model into Tinkercad, and that's because, as many of you probably already guessed, I'm going to be using the exact same base model for this build as I did with the Macau guitar. That's because I have the base modeled already, as well as the cage and bracket system that holds that together, and the box and cutout that I know perfectly accepts the cage and base combo. So all of that is already figured out. Future Brian cutting in here for just a second. If you don't understand any of the references that I keep making to the Macau guitar, check out my previous video to see the fishbone guitar that I made from Majora's Mask. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more builds just like this one. You can see the perspective manipulation that I'm working with here as well, where the crab arm actually comes up and over the neck of the guitar here. And that's because you need your fingers to be able to get in here and play the strings, but in the concept art, it looks like the bass just kind of morphs into this crab arm. So when you're looking at it dead on, that illusion is still here and intact, but it's still playable. And then you can see I have these two supporting arms, one attached to the neck, screwed in right at the end here, just like the dovetail joint was on the Macau guitar. But this time the dovetail joint is coming in from the side and holding onto the claw. And then over here we have it attaching underneath, because here on the neck there's actually a gradual slope and there was no good place to screw in the support. So I'm screwing it in from the underside. Similarly, on this end, we have this eye stalk area, which in the concept art, this segment of the arm just comes in under the eye stalk in some sort of an attachment, but I needed a way for it to actually attach. So I have a dovetail mounted on the box here, so that will slip in and slide down over the dovetail to hold this end of the crab arm in place. And I could have just had it attached to the underside of the crab, but as you can see, I did cut out a significant portion of the crab from the original model that I did in Nomad Sculpt. And that's because, as it is, this carapace here is already going to use a full kilogram of filament. So I wanted to save as much filament as possible, and that cutout let me save a good amount of it. Now you may be wondering why it is pink, because there's hardly any pink in the concept art or the actual in-game model, and there's a very specific purpose for the pink. There's actually a technique that I want to try out for the first time later on with the painting, so we'll get there when we get there, but the pink will be very important for that. Now I just need to print it all out. The carapace and the claw are too big to fit on my bamboo printer, so I'll have to do those on the Anycubic Cobra 2 Max as long as it cooperates, but everything else, including these segments and the cylinders that connect them, and then the cage and these brackets, all that should be printed on the Bamboo X1 Carbon. So as long as everything goes according to plan, you should be seeing that now. But of course I jinxed myself and everything did not go according to plan. The X1 Carbon did great, it always does great, but the Cobra 2 Max was a different story. As you can see, I have been having quite a bit of trouble trying to print out the carapace on the Cobra 2 Max. That's because it keeps giving me this nozzle NTC abnormal error. And it has been giving it to me a lot. It's one of the main reasons why I don't quite like this printer. I have been through every step of the troubleshooting guide multiple times, unplugging every wire, plugging it back in like they recommend. I have probed all the areas with the multimeter. Nothing looks abnormal. I have spent months talking with Anycubic support online, getting parts shipped out and replaced, and still, every now and then, I am plagued with this error. And it's gotten to the point where I've wasted more plastic than I'm really comfortable with. So I don't think I'll be trying again on this printer. Instead, I'm going to cut the model into 4 separate parts, and then I'll be able to fit it onto the X1 Carbon, which should do a much better job. And unsurprisingly, it did do a much better job. And I've read online that I'm not the only one who has been having issues with the quality of the electronic components in Anycubic's FDM machine specifically. So Anycubic, if you are listening, please do better. But they're not listening, so we will move forward with the bamboo. And it did a great job. You can see this large central seam that I will need to fill, sand, and then paint over. Not much of a seam here where I put on these points on both ends, but this one, totally expected, and I'm actually okay with it being here. In the Macau guitar, that would have been really frustrating because I wasn't painting that one, but this one I should be able to hide pretty easily. I'll also have to hide some of these voids that you can see in here in the gill section. And I don't really know where those are coming from because they're not present in either the Nomad Sculpt model or on Tinkercad. So something's going on there, and I'll have to figure that out with the 3D model. The cage and brackets turned out well as these 2 support pieces. I'll show you those a little further, but I did want to point out this arm, and let me flip the base around and I'll show you a little closer. All right, so here we are on the other side, and you can see that I was able to attach this arm section underneath the eye stalk. I fit it in and then was able to slip it over the dovetail joint as designed, but I'm sure you can see all of this super glue residue. That's because when I tried to get it off, I couldn't. So I decided if this was going to be a permanent feature, it was going to be a permanent feature, so I attached it with some glue. You can probably also see some super glue residue here. That's just because I filled this void of where it was split in half when I was joining the 2 halves together, just to add a little bit of additional strength here. Speaking of adding additional strength, I'm sure you're wondering about these 3 holes, and these 2 are to add strength. I should have modeled them in, but I totally forgot, so I drilled them in after the fact and reinforced it with some CA glue. Basically, I'll have some machine bolts that go in through these holes and press against the cage just to hold these 2 pieces nice and tight together, even though it's not going anywhere. Couldn't hurt to have a little more security. This hole is actually a mistake. Originally it held this configuration of nuts and bolts, and this is just a place to add a guitar strap, because the Macau guitar did not have a convenient place to add a strap, and that was a huge oversight. So I'm rectifying that in this build. I originally tried it in this hole, but it ended up making the bass tilt forward too much, so I moved it over here and filled this in with some glue. I'll sand it down and paint it, and that shouldn't look too bad. You know, actually, you know what? No. Scratch all of that. I am dumb. I gotta fix something. I'll be right back. It was literally during the filming of that last clip that I realized that I made an even larger oversight with this build. You see, this box originally needed to be closed off in the back because on the other side of it was a fish skeleton in the Macau guitar. But this crab carapace doesn't have anything on the back, so this box doesn't need to be closed off. So if I were to open the back of the box, I could access the original mounting point for the guitar strap, no problem, and I would be able to access the tuning pegs, which is a huge deal. It's one of the biggest issues with the Macau guitar is having to take off the skull to reach the tuning pegs. So it's not the most elegant solution to take a Dremel and then a hot knife to remove this plastic, but I do think it's going to be the best thing for the build. Honestly, I should probably print the whole thing again if I were going for the most professional outcome, but I really don't want to waste the plastic, so I'm doing it this way. Unfortunately, I ended up dropping it off camera in a really catastrophic way, breaking it into about 18 pieces, half of which I can't find, which really sucks. However, it does give me the excuse I need to just reprint it, and it's unfortunate that I'll have to waste another kilogram of filament to do that in another 2 or so days, but it does mean that I'll be able to address some of these things that I should have modeled in the beginning. So this will look a lot better because I'll just cut this off, model in these holes, and I think I want to bolster this section a little bit just to make sure that it doesn't split down here like it was starting to do. So there are a couple of things I wanted to fix on it anyway, and I think the project will be better for it, but not so fun. Fortunately, while the second carapace is printing, there's plenty of work that we can still be doing in the garage here. And that's mostly filling and sanding some of the larger voids in these other 3D printed crab parts. And you can see I've started that already. I'm using this Bondo spot putty to do that, and basically the process is just to put it into the voids, push it smooth, wait for it to dry, and then sand it all flush again. And I'm not going to be able to remove all of the 3D printed layer lines, but I think that will be okay for our purposes. The next step of the process is actually using the secret ingredient, toothpaste, in that process I was hinting at earlier that I wanted to try. So basically, I'm going to take this toothpaste and apply these little dots all over the crab shell, kind of to mimic the dot pattern that is present in the source material. And the hope is that the toothpaste will act as a sort of paint resist for the next steps of the process. There are products you can buy that do basically this, but I've read that toothpaste works just as well, so we're going to try that. After that, I'm going to apply a layer of filler primer to everything, which should help even out some of those layer lines where there isn't toothpaste. And then, when I wipe everything off in the end, those layer lines and the pink color should shine through a little bit underneath all the rest of the paint, which I think should give a pretty cool effect, but we're going to find out. But before I wipe off any of the toothpaste, I do need to apply the actual paint. So I'm going to be using these two different shades. This coral color on the left is going to be the main crab body, and then the rusty color on the right is going to be more of the shadows. And I think both of those colors should look pretty nice against that pink underlayer. Are they going to look weird because one's gloss and one's satin? I don't know. Is it going to smell minty fresh? Yes. And you may have noticed this array of holes that I modeled and printed out, and those are to accept these cylinders that connect all the pieces. So I can fit those into the holes and they hold the pieces so I can paint them easier. And I know some of you may be thinking that that looks a little top heavy and might tip over, but I accounted for that by putting in some okay, maybe they're a little too tight, but I modeled in some keyholes. So those keyholes actually interface with these wood screws that I have into this board, and it slides into place and holds everything nice and secure. So that's the plan. And I also printed out some eyes, and I did that flat on the build plate, so I made a flat spot there because that's much easier to print, and also I can put that flat spot against the eye stalk so you won't even notice it. And you can see where the 3D printed layer lines get quite pronounced at the top. So I'm thinking it might be fun to do a little bit of an experiment here with the two different eyes. Essentially, I'm planning to start off by just sanding and filling and priming one of the eyeballs so that I can paint them both at the same time and compare just how bad the unfinished one looks and how much work it's going to take to actually make them both look nice. And after a little bit of work, both eyes are now ready to paint. Hopefully you can see that the left one is a lot more smooth, and that's after that Bondo spot filler, sanding, and then filler primer. And I'm going to be using this metallic gold spray paint because the eyes in the game are kind of a goldish hue, so I think this will work. And wow, it really does not take much paint to see the difference that filling and sanding actually makes. The eye on the left is super shiny and smooth, and the one on the right is very textured and vaguely gold colored. Not reflective at all. You can see that seam running up and down the sides and all of the layer lines. Not as great, but the one on the left did take about 2 hours. And I knew from the beginning of this experiment that I would eventually need to do that whole process over again for the second eye, but that's totally okay because eyes are kind of supposed to be smooth and glossy, and that effort is really not wasted here. And again, that process is using this Bondo spot putty to fill in all those layer lines and the voids between them, and then sanding it all flat and repeating that several times. And then after I'm done with that, it's pretty smooth. I hit it with that filler primer, which should take care of the rest of those inconsistencies. And then you're ready to paint. So I've gotten those eyes as smooth as they are going to get. And I could spend a lot more time on these, but it's been a few hours as it is, so I think they're going to be good like this. And hopefully you can see why I won't be painting the full Macau guitar. I don't have that kind of time or frankly the patience. So in other news, I think I accidentally made a prop from Dandadan. If you know, you know. And I do know, so let's fix that by adding a little bit of black paint to come up with that kind of sclera pupil situation we got going on. After this paint dries, I have a trick to add a glossy top coat that makes eyes look really good, so stay tuned for that. Now back to the other crab parts. And the process is largely the same, but I realized that this red strip would kind of make it look like there are no spots in this area if I were just to add the spots now. So I did decide to paint over just these areas. And fortunately, I looked in my collection and I was able to find a spray paint that matches pretty well to the print color. So I've been using this to fill in those areas on these other crab parts so far, and I still have this one to do. And the pink does not match 100% perfectly, but that's okay because in nature there are variations in color, and I think that might look nice in these spots as well. So I still think it was worth it to use pink for the filament color for the base, but we'll see. Now that everything is more or less the same shade of pink, it's time to add those dots that will be underneath all the other paint that we will wipe away later. And there's no real technique here other than trying to make sure that the dots are random and not looking like too much of a pattern. Next is the filler primer over all the spots that we just put down, and you want to make sure that you get a nice even coat on this and make sure you give it adequate time to fully dry. And again, the idea for this is to fill in some of those larger layer lines except for the places that we put the toothpaste. Those should retain some of that texture. So the filler primer is on. I put it together for a dry fit just to make sure it was still fitting together nice, and accidentally took off some of the toothpaste, which just shows that the proof of concept is sound. So now I'll take it apart again, stand it back up on the stand, and we can paint a base coat. With that first coat looking nice and even, it is now time to add the paprika in all the areas that I want to shade and bring out some of those details. And I'll be honest, in this part of the painting process, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I do know that it's looking a little monotone and I need to add some of this paint to make it look a little more lifelike. My main concern with this step of painting is that in the concept art, you could convince me that the base is primarily this coral color and doesn't need much else, but there's enough shading that I think we do need to add some darker colors. So my job is to do that in a way where neither of the colors really overpowers the other and they blend together smoothly. So I've decided to paint all of these pieces individually so I can have a little bit more control over the overspray and not get paint where I don't want it. I'm trying to do a really good job of just hitting the outer edges to add a little bit of definition without going too far. And here is what I have been able to come up with so far. And I know it's kind of hard to see all of the different color variations. So on the left, I do have a piece that is just that coral color, and on the right, I have a piece that is just the paprika, which ended up being a lot more of a red-orange than I was imagining. But together, I think I was able to come up with a pretty cool effect that blends them pretty well. So to remove the toothpaste then, and you can see I've started on that already. Basically, I'm just taking a microfiber shop towel and rubbing at the toothpaste until it comes off. And it doesn't take the rest of the paint with it. So once you wipe it all off, you're left with that 3D printed texture underneath, which I think looks pretty cool. So I'm going to keep doing this, but I think I'm going to add a little more paint as well, because the rest of it is kind of looking a little too Amanita muscaria, which is that really poisonous red mushroom that everybody knows. So I think I'm going to add a little more coral colored paint in this kind of a mist splatter pattern over the rest of the dots. Hopefully it'll tie the color scheme together, but we'll see. Also worth noting that I did switch to this deep red filament color for these cylinder sections. That's because as I was painting everything, paint would start to accumulate in this seam here and lock these cylinders in place, which is not what I want. So I reprinted them in the color that I think will serve as kind of the shadowy sections in between the two leg joints. So I shouldn't have to paint those at all. And then I'm sure you've noticed that this part isn't painted yet, and that's because I wanted to make sure that this dovetail joint was going to fit with the new carapace that I was printing, because I did adjust that fit just a little bit. So I know it fits now, so I can go ahead and paint this piece as well. For the paint splatter, all I'm doing is taking a fairly stiff bristle brush, applying a fairly thin paint to it, and then using those stiff bristles to flick paint all over the piece. The effect is fairly subtle, especially from far away, but I do think it helps tie the rest of the colors together and make it look like it's from nature. And the glossiness on the eye there was achieved with nail polish, specifically a top coat, which is kind of designed to go over paint and provide a glossy finish, and it works great for this application. This step really brings life to anything with eyes. Nice and glossy. Now I just need to glue these in place. And then I think we're done, so let me assemble everything and then I can give the people what they want. Japas's finished crab base. And here we have, by popular demand, Japas's crab base, life-sized, fully functional, and painted to match the concept art, which I think came out pretty good considering I'm not the best at painting. And the colors are a little off, but I'm still pretty happy with how this looks. The forced perspective here, making the base blend into this crab arm, I think works pretty well. You can still fit your fingers underneath to play. You can bump into them if you're a little aggressive with your play style, but otherwise it works really well. I think these support arms are pretty good in concept and in practice, although you can see them from certain angles. So I did print a set in black and a set in that deep red, just in case you want that to blend in more with the color scheme or with the base, and I think that does help hide it a little better. Either way, it works pretty well. You can get your fingers all up and down the neck, so not a bad way to handle that problem there. If I turn it around, you can see some of the changes I made to the carapace, where I cut off the back, and that's so that you can access this strap point, and then the tuning pegs, which is a huge deal. It's a huge quality of life improvement compared to the Macau guitar. And then you can also see the holes that I modeled into the back with those machine screws that are fastening the carapace to the cage and holding everything nice and tight. I can imagine there are a few people watching this video that like Majora's Mask as much as I do and might want to own a bass like this. And there are two ways that might be able to happen. The first is that I've started channel memberships, different price tiers offering different benefits. One of which being access to all of my 3D models. So anything that I've modeled up until this point, including the Macau guitar and the Japas bass, and then anything I model in the future. So if you'd like to print one of these out for yourself, that's the way to do it. And check out the other tier levels and see if any of them might be right for you. The other way is to own this very bass. Because this wasn't originally on the big list of projects, it's kind of an extra. The only reason I tried to make something like this in the first place is because the people in the comments wanted to see it. I'm really glad I did. And as much as I would like to display this right next to the Macau guitar, I just don't have the wall space or any other space in my house to keep this item. So I opened a store on Etsy and I'm going to be selling this bass there. And I know that it's fairly expensive, but that's to account for the amount of man hours in the design and the build, the filling, the sanding, the painting, all that goes into a project like this. So if you love the Japas Crab Bass and maybe want to own one of the very first B-Blop original props, that's the way to do it. Link in the description for that. And if you do choose to purchase this base, just be aware that 3D printed plastic isn't the strongest material in the world. I wouldn't call it fragile, but I would be a little more careful with this than you would with a normal base. Personally, I would treat it mostly as a display piece that you can play, and I encourage you to play it, but I wouldn't really recommend this for gigging. But totally up to you, you could slam it on the ground for all I care. Please don't do that. Also, it does require a right-angled 1/4 inch cord to slip around this part of the crab arm, but I've included one of those. And if you don't care about owning one of these bases and just enjoyed watching the video, thank you so much for making it to the end and for joining me on this ride. I really enjoy making these kinds of projects, and it really means a lot to me that so many people have shown interest in joining me for that process. So, if you want to see more videos just like this and some other stuff as well, subscribe to the channel. My next video I think will be Nintendo and won't focus quite as much on 3D printing. So if you want to see me try some new processes, check that out. Thanks for watching and subscribing to the channel. And if you enjoyed this video, you might enjoy this one too, so check it out.